After you've been in combat for a while, you begin to see the advantages of diplomacy and talking with each other. Of course, that was completely lacking in Vietnam. We seemed to be a nation bent on teaching the North Vietnamese a lesson.
An old infantryman recalls the moral struggle in Vietnam, in all combat, to fiercely fight the enemy, yet recognize him as human.
I can see collecting Mickey Mouse glove, but a combat medal that somebody has given their life or been wounded, I can't think like that, and I don't think like that.
And a former infantry commander from the Vietnam War discusses what it meant to him to be awarded medals of valor, and after decades, how complex the legacy of those medals can be. Hello, welcome to the Mighty Pen Podcast. I'm David L. Robbins, your host and founder of the Mighty Pen Project, a free writing program for veterans and their families, in partnership with the Virginia War Memorial Foundation in Richmond, Virginia. Our first story, The Sentry, was written by David Aldridge, who served 3 tours in Vietnam, most of it walking point, which made him the first to encounter enemy forces. David looks back on one episode when a North Vietnamese soldier he encountered at close range was so clearly as young as him. Then our second story, Quarter Cav, begins with a laughable look at how much better it is for an infantryman to ride than to walk, then becomes a heartfelt discussion on honors awarded for valor in battle decades ago, and what an old soldier fears might happen to his medals. Let's listen first to The Sentry, read with brio by David Watkins. Then I'll talk with author David Aldridge.
In Vietnam, I chose to walk point for my company all the time. I was very good at it. Even though it entailed more hardship for me, I preferred it because I wanted to control my own destiny. Otherwise, my fate was in someone else's hands. My experience had been if I let others walk point, everything went to shit and we got people killed. I didn't trust others to do the job right, and so I took the awesome responsibility on my own shoulders of keeping us all alive. When I walked point, I had to put all intrusive thoughts out of my mind. I could not allow anything else to affect me. Not bad news from back in the States, the unbearable heat, the monsoon rains that came at you like a biblical wall of water that blotted out the sun, nor 100 other distractions. None of it could be allowed to keep me from doing my job as a point man. I couldn't allow myself to consider the numerous snakes, the jungle spiders as big as your head, the leeches, the multitude of possible booby traps, punji sticks, ravenous tigers, and unexploded ordnance everywhere. My focus had to be laser sharp on staying alive. The normal chatter going on in my mind had to cease. I had to wipe the slate clean and truly listen to what was out in front of me. Hearing a twig snap could mean life or death. As the point man, I had to be able to spot the slightest movement and zoom in on it for any sign of danger. When I walked point, I was in charge. We moved at my speed. When we made contact with the enemy, I was the one who decided how close the artillery could come. In the middle of October 1968, I was beginning to feel the combined effects of combat. After 40 continuous days of firefights and blown ambushes, I began to feel a loss of balance in my life. I already knew it's not normal to kill other beings. But no matter how much training you've had in preparation for war, nothing could ever really prepare you for the horrid reality of killing someone. Sadly, it's the only way to survive in combat. When the enemy is shooting at you and doing the best to kill you, it simply becomes an act of self-preservation to shoot back. But still, it wears you down. Killing others takes its toll on every aspect of you, mentally, psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. It grates on your soul, and with each death you inch closer and closer to the precipice of insanity. Others avoided that fate by concluding that we're doing God's work in killing the godless commies. I knew in my heart that that wasn't true. Even communists had families and friends they loved. Religion didn't help alleviate the feeling that I was becoming less by killing more. And periodically, after a big firefight or ground attack, a chaplain would show up, hold services, and then get on a chopper and fly back in time for supper at the officers' club. I knew the chaplains had their jobs to do, but what they had to say seemed hollow somehow. It all seemed superficial, shallow, and perfunctory to me. It just never soothed my soul to hear someone throwing out cliches and the same old tired phrase about ashes to ashes, dust to dust. When I felt troubled enough to speak with our chaplain, I told him an inner voice speaks to me sometimes and warns me of danger, and it seems to come from my heart area. I told him that voice had saved my life many times. He just stared at me like I'd just set myself on fire. Then he muttered something like, "God moves in mysterious ways," and hurried away. And no shit. Big fucking help there, Padre. We were operating in War Zone C, and we set up a company-sized ambush. I made sure we had 50% awake while the others dozed. I managed to get 3 hours sleep between my turns for radio watch. My whole company was all sleep-deprived and had borderline heat exhaustion on a daily basis from the extreme heat and humidity of the jungles of Vietnam. We had just finished a trek to Phuc Vinh from the Cambodian border where we had no sleep for 5 consecutive days. When we were finally allowed to lay down, I slept for 24 hours straight. We were chronically exhausted and desperately needed a stand down. After the sun broke the horizon, I stood up and stepped off towards the kill zone to take a piss. What issued forth was an orange syrupy liquid that would have freaked out any urologist. Now, I didn't know if it was because of the dehydration or the malaria pills we had to take every Monday. I decided I need to try to drink more fluids. I rubbed my sore shoulders after I buttoned my fly. I had almost recovered overnight from the deep grooves cut by the ammo straps and my web gear. The extra weight we carried rarely varied. Each of us carried extra ammo for the machine guns, extra hand grenades in addition to our normal equipment, sea rations, and 6 quarts of water. I took a chunk of C4 explosive and set it on fire to heat up some coffee. As I stirred in the coffee and cocoa mix, my thoughts turned to my new wife. The previous month, I had returned from an R&R to Hawaii to get married, and it was on my mind more than it should have been. When you pay too much attention to the errant thoughts in your head, you can become preoccupied and miss signs of the enemy. My new wife was expecting a baby, and I was mulling over the possibilities of how we would continue our relationship when I got back to the States. I tried to shake it all off and get ready for the day. To be eternally hypervigilant is the curse of every point man. So I pushed all that out of my mind as I prepared for another day of walking point. My company commander, Captain Zapp, radioed that Alpha Company was joining us and would be taking point for a search and destroy mission. I welcomed the respite as we left our ambush position and hooked into the tail end of Alpha. My platoon was on the right flank and progress was slow. There were frequent breaks and my mind began to wander again as we trudged along. The area we were in contained a profusion of tamarind trees and bushes with beautiful red, yellow, and even pinkish-colored flowers. It looked like we had stumbled into Eden's back door. I marveled at the great variety of trees. There were banyan trees with their gnarly roots and teakwood trees that soared above the triple canopy jungle. I saw huge stands of impenetrable bamboo that meant water was nearby. That also meant it was a good place for an enemy base camp. After 3 hours of sheer boredom, the point began receiving sniper fire. All along the flank, we took up positions behind some teakwood trees. We listened to the radio chatter for half an hour as soldier after soldier was wounded when Alpha tried to maneuver on the sniper. Finally, I called out to Renner, my M79 guy, to go kill that son of a bitch. Renner dropped his rucksack and carrying his bag of M79 rounds, he took off running forward. After 5 minutes, we all heard the distant bloop of an HE round leaving the barrel of the M79 and a few seconds later, the explosion. The sniper returned fire and there was another bloop and another explosion. I could hear guys from Alpha hollering, "Yeah, got him!" A few minutes later, Renner came back to our platoon, smiling ear to ear. "Great job, Renner." He picked up his rucksack and moved back along the flank. Scanone, my machine gunner, he got my attention from up ahead. He had passed over what looked like a small trail leading off perpendicular to our direction of travel and was motioning me to come forward. As I approached him, he motioned me to stop just shy of the trail. He said, "Dave, just down this trail, I just saw a VC pop his head up from the spider hole, and when Renner came running by me, the VC ducked back down inside. Everybody has been walking by here all day, and no one ever saw this." I peeked around the corner of the foliage, spied the hole, and knew immediately what I had to do. I had dreamed this situation almost a year ago when I was back in California. I told Scanone, "Give me your pistol. Cover me with a machine gun after I throw a hand grenade in the spider hole and get ready to move forward to me after it goes off." I dropped my rucksack, pulled a hand grenade out. I jacked the round in the chamber of the 45 and pulled the pin from the grenade. I started running towards the spider hole and immediately saw the tripwire of a booby trap. I leaped over it and continued. As I neared the spider hole, I let the handle fly on the grenade and waited a couple seconds before dropping it in the hole. 2 seconds later, there was a muffled blast deep in the spider hole. I hollered back to watch out for the booby trap. Black smoke wafted up out of the hole, and I heard a loud, tortured wailing as I surveyed the surrounding area for more of the enemy. Scanone and some others joined me as I waited for the smoke to clear. When I heard the misery the NVA soldier was in, I was seized with an attack of conscience, so overwhelming that it took my breath away. Suddenly, the soldier was no longer just another faceless enemy to be killed, but another human being who I was connected to in unseen and unfathomable ways. Something in me seemed to break, and I gave Scanone his pistol and climbed down in the hole to pull the soldier out. He had multiple wounds to his torso and head and was already in his death throes as I handed him off to our head medic, Doc Inverso. My throat and chest area were constricted, and I said meekly through the raw emotion I felt, "Try and save him, Doc." I was on the verge of tears. I said loudly, "What the fuck? He's just a fucking kid." The soldier looked to be no older than 15. His pitiful gurgles and struggling for life-giving air made me feel sick to my stomach. My RTO, Louis Ragusa, came running to me and said, "Dauntless 6 and Delta 6 are on the horn and want to know what the fuck is going on." I took the radio handset from Louis and said, "Delta 6, this is Delta 3-6. We killed one each November Victor Alpha. He was most likely a Sentry for their base camp. Do you want us to cloverleaf the area?" "Negative. We're moving out in 5 minutes to an LZ for extraction. Start moving forward. Out." An hour later, we were picked up and flown back to Dion for another operation. The dark mood that descended on me was impenetrable. No one said a word to me the rest of the day. I just could not shake the feeling that I had fucked up somehow. I didn't need to explain to anyone that I was one step closer to the precipice. I could not change what I had done, but I did resolve I would not do it the same way again. From then on, I would give the enemy a chance to surrender if the opportunity ever came up again.
I'm joined by David Aldridge, author of The Sentry. David, listening to that story, it strikes me that it wasn't about the Vietnamese boy that was in the hidey hole. It wasn't about walking point. That story, like so much of your work, is about the struggle that every warrior must at some point face, yeah? About how do you conduct warfare in a humane way? And should you conduct warfare in a humane way? I just felt you personified something really epic in that story, swearing that you would let an enemy have the chance to surrender. Dude, people don't go to war thinking like that. What changed in you? He wasn't the first guy you'd encountered. He wasn't the first enemy that you had neutralized. What happened?
Well, after you've been in combat for a while, you begin to see the advantages of diplomacy and talking with each other. Of course, that was completely lacking in Vietnam. We seemed to be a nation bent on teaching the North Vietnamese a lesson. And so we were in it to win it at that time. Of course, it didn't turn out that way, but we had won, quotes around won. World War II, and Korea, nobody ever really wanted to talk about. So we wanted to relive the glory of World War II.
Is that measured in things like body count?
Yeah, that was the measure of success in Vietnam. We killed more of them than they killed of us. And it was all about killing.
And faced with that in terms of this story, sounds like you rejected it.
Yeah, you begin to reject it because it really does grate on your soul. Every time we'd have a large ground attack, or, VIPs would fly in from all over Vietnam and march through the battlefield. Killed a lot of them over here on this side, Sarge. Yes, sir, sure did. And then they would get their photo op and they would be back on the helicopter and go back to Saigon. You begin to question, what's all this about? Who benefits from all this? And it seems to be politicians and the higher ups in the army. So
No bragging rights for killing a guy.
no. I only remember one time someone bragged about killing a North Vietnamese soldier, and of course, I was in no mood to hear it, so I jumped on him right away and told him, "Don't ever do that." Every person has value, and it upset me that he was bragging about killing some kid, some 16, 17-year-old kid.
Now, how was this received, though? When you bring a young enemy, a young North Vietnamese soldier out of a spider hole, you shout for the medic for an enemy, that everybody around you is thinking, just kill him. I mean, that's why we're here. How could you hold on to that in the midst of what had to be a cultural tidal wave going the other direction, saying, no, we're here to kill. We're not here to be this humane. How'd you hang on to that?
I did it by holding on to my own humanity. Even though I was always questioning religion, the existence of God, and all of that, I still had my own level of humanity. I couldn't let go of that. If you let go of that in combat, there's a danger of just really losing your mind. I think people who have had to take other people's lives understand what I'm talking about. It's not something I would ever do again unless I absolutely had to. I did my best to be a good soldier at that time, and I thought that's part of being a good soldier. Once the enemy is unarmed, wounded, you're supposed to take care of them.
You did 3 tours in Vietnam 3 times. You saw to it that you walked point. What put you out front? Because honestly, Dave, these attitudes you're espousing now are in a way walking point. In a way, in the middle of warfare and combat, you're espousing positions that are kind of singular: compassion, a measured response to an enemy who probably would not have had that measured response for you. So what put you out front when you were with your units?
I knew that I could do the better job of walking point because I was able to shut down my rampant thoughts in my head. I was able to listen and hear a voice that spoke to me and warned me of danger and warned me of booby traps and tripwires. And so I knew that voice would protect me and thereby protect the people I was walking with.
What happened when you told the people behind you that you were following a voice? Did you ever tell them?
Yes, I did. I think they understood. I'm friends with some of the same guys today. They're all alive. The ones that haven't been killed off from Agent Orange, they understand better today what I was talking about back in 1968 or 67 or 70. I was blessed that I could hear that voice. I'm blessed that the voice chose to speak to me.
You never asked who it was.
I never did ask. Not at that time. Later I did, but not at that time, no. I was too afraid of the answer, and I wasn't ready to be the new Joan of Arc, you know? So,
Hey, easy, buddy.
well, you know, that's a big responsibility once you realize, oh my goodness gracious, God spoke to me. So it was a little scary, but I was okay with that because it saved my life
And others.
and others, and God bless them all.
You always I can never really figure out what to say at the end of my interviews with you because you can't be summed up. I can't go, well, there you have it. Let's leave it there.
Yeah.
Big D, good to see you, brother.
Thank you. It's a pleasure being here.
Now, our second story, Quarter Cav, read by Alan Sater. Afterward, I'll speak with author Jess Lockhart.
The 1st of the 4th Cavalry was the cavalry unit assigned to the 1st Division. I was OpCon, assigned for operational control several times to them. Being a mechanized unit, they had their pluses and minuses. On the plus side, they had armored personnel carriers and tanks. This meant they could carry all the ammo, rations, and water we needed. They also had a Delta troop, a company of helicopters assigned to them. In addition, 1st to the 4th carried their own doctor. But the most important plus was that I didn't have to walk. On the minus side, they had to travel roads that were landmine and RPG magnets. They couldn't very well sneak up on the bad guys, and the motorized units had to be refueled every few days. In the spring of 1969, Alpha Company had just arrived at Lyke for our monthly 2 nights and 3 days of R&R. This meant we could get a few cold beers, hot shower, semi-clean clothes, and real food. The XO met us early in the afternoon at the helipad with trucks and a deuce and a half trailer with iced beer and sodas. By supper time, the beer was gone. The men headed for the Vietnamese village just outside the wire. I took the officers to the Division Officers Club. We'd only been at the club a few hours when the bartender told me I had a phone call. Today, that would not seem unusual, but in Vietnam, we never got phone calls, just radio transmissions. Hey, Lieutenant Lockhart here. On the line was the battalion duty NCO with the unwelcome news that our mission had been changed. My platoon was being OpCon to the 1st of the 4th Cav. We were to move out the next day. I told the duty NCO to contact the company first sergeant, have him start trying to round up my men. The majority were somewhere in the village. I picked up my drunk FO, Dennis Sharkey, loaded him in my Jeep, and went looking for the Cav headquarters. The roads of Lyke, a former rubber plantation, were laid out in grids. The Cav unit bivouacked on the west side of the compound. I found the Cav headquarters, got the mission info, then Sharkey and I headed home. On the way back to my company area, I had to make a left turn. Halfway into the turn, I fell out of the Jeep. I may have been going too fast for my own state of inebriation. Anyway, I fell out. I remember sitting up on the side of the road to watch the Jeep chug down the road and yelling, "Sharky, take over!" Dennis was puking out his side of the Jeep when I suppose he looked up and I was gone. The Jeep veered into a ditch, centered on a rubber tree. I had to check on Sharky. His head had cracked the windshield. Jeep windshields are thick, but apparently not so much as Sharky's head. I checked him out. Other than a bump, he was okay. The Jeep was another story. The impact had caved in the front grille and the radiator fan was eating into the radiator, but the vehicle still ran, and we were only a few blocks from the company area, so I drove it back. When in the field, the company supply sergeant took care of my Jeep. I woke him up, told him the Jeep was making a funny noise, to check it out. Next morning, I rounded up my hungover platoon and left for the Cav's tank park. We loaded onto the tracks, then moved out of the compound. Clearing the outer perimeter of the track, 2 vehicles ahead of mine, pulled out a line, stopped, and lowered its rear door. A young Vietnamese girl ran inside. The door closed behind her, and we continued to head out. She got out a few hours later as we went through another village. I learned an important lesson working with the Cav. Never yell, "Incoming RPGs!" One evening we were on a sweep mission. A unit near us had the artillery firing illumination rounds for them. When an artillery piece fires an illumination round, the projectile travels a preset distance, then pops open to release a piece of phosphorus attached to a parachute. This lights up the prescribed area. A lot of math is involved to make everything happen properly. That evening, we sat on the tracks, watching the illumination rounds go off like fireworks. Suddenly, something zoomed over my head to land behind me and kick up dust. Before I could grasp what was happening, another projectile zoomed by. On instinct, I yelled, "Incoming RPGs!" This, I learned in the next few moments, was a very wrong thing to yell. The Cav has an SOP to start firing with every weapon they have in all directions. Soon, another canister came overhead. I figured it was just an empty canister from the illumination rounds. The Cav erupted into a wild shooting spree. I shouted at my FO Sharky, who was shooting his .45 pistol in no particular direction. I knew him well enough to understand he was nervous and scared easily. I yelled, "Why and what are you shooting at?" He emptied his magazine and as he reloaded, shouted back, "I don't know." Then he continued shooting. I finally got him to quit, and the situation calmed down. Most of the troop were embarrassed, and a few of us laughed pretty hard over the fact that the commotion started over our own illumination rounds. In the darkness, the Cav troop CO ordered the tracks to move forward. I was in the commander's hatch of my vehicle as we sped forward. The driver could hardly see where we were going. We hit a big stump. Everything stopped moving forward but me. I was tossed out of another vehicle. And when I landed after tumbling down the front of the tank, I split my right index finger, trigger finger, from the tip to the second joint. The Cav's doctor looked me over, sewed up my finger, put a splint on it, and told me to go do my duty. I was disappointed because I had visions of being medevaced to the rear for a couple of days. I healed up okay, but feared with all the germs in the jungle my finger would rot off. I did lose feeling in that upper part of the finger for a couple of years. It's all right now. In 1970, the Army relocated the 1st Division back to Fort Riley, Kansas. I'd been reassigned to Riley from Vietnam in December 1969 as the Assistant G1 for the division. I still held a fondness for the quarter Cav. One day, the squadron commander held a small ceremony, and a friend of mine, the Delta Troop Commander, Ace Casalio, awarded me a set of Cav spurs. Today, I display them proudly in a shadow box with the ribbons I wore on my dress greens. I've told my son that when I die, to take all my medals and memorabilia. If he doesn't want them, he should burn them. I don't want them to end up in a yard sale in the hands of some collector or wannabe.
That was Quarter Cav, read by the inimitable Alan Sater. And I'm joined in the studio by my old friend and the author of Quarter Cav, Jess Lockhart. So, Jess, the first thing that jumps out of that story is chaos. You fell out of 2 vehicles in this story. So the first one, you were so drunk, you fell out of a Jeep you were driving.
Yes.
Okay, take it.
I was going down the road in Lock Hay, chugging down the road, and I had to
Is
make
that all you were chugging?
We'd just come from the officers club, and I had to make a left-hand turn. So as I'm turning the steering wheel like this, I roll out of the Jeep. I remember sitting on the road there. I wasn't hurt, and I looked up, and there was my Jeep chugging down the road.
Without you, and you're yelling at your friend.
I hollered at my FO that I had, Ennis Sharky, and he was puking out the other side of the Jeep, and I hollered, "Sharky, take over." And he looked up, and I wasn't there.
He was so drunk, you had to say to him, "Hey, you're in a driverless car. All right, R&R, once a month, 2 nights, 3 days."
Yeah.
Did everybody just get shit-faced?
No.
Not that I would blame them.
No, the company bought beer. The Army gave the company so much money per man per month. And so we bought beer and soda. Not all of the men drank beer, so I drank their share.
There it is. Now, the next vehicle you fell out of in this story is an armored personnel carrier.
I didn't.
You're sitting up in the front. You're in the turret.
No, armored personnel carrier has an opening in the top of it.
Yeah.
And I'm sitting up there on the edge of it. The driver hits a stump, and everything stops except me. I didn't fall out of it. I just fell forward.
But you were sober.
Oh, yes. We were out in the field.
Oh, you're out in the field. All right. The thing I want to jump to is the end of that story. You, in a previous story, detailed how a colleague of yours in Vietnam sacrificed his life to save yours in a rice paddy when he dove on a grenade and saved your life, and he was awarded the Medal of Honor for that act. And this notion of valor and honor and the way the military and your society reward and recognize this valor is through commendations and medals. You have your share. First of all, what do those medals mean to you right now, looking back on them?
When I look at the Silver Star, I remember that night that Gary Miller got killed.
The gentleman who fell on the...
Yeah, who jumped on the grenade and was awarded the Medal of Honor. During that 24-hour period, I was awarded a Silver Star. Then the next day, we got into a pretty bad shooting match, and I got a Silver Star that night and a Purple Heart. And then the next day, I was awarded a Bronze Star with a V for valor.
Mm-hmm.
When I see those medals, I think of that. The Army has jargon that they write up for these medals, but actually what happened was when Gary died, I took his rifle and found the Viet Cong and
that had thrown the grenade,
and I killed him. That night with the Silver Star, that's how I got that, and the Purple Heart. And the next day when we moved out, we moved into an ambush, got ambushed, and it was a pretty intense shooting match there. And I had called in jets and helicopters and artillery and real close support. In fact, it was so close that I think in the story I wrote that when the jets came over and was firing their miniguns, the hot brass from the jets were falling on us, and they actually burned you.
Yeah.
And also that's when a Loach, who was working with the Cobra,
and the Loach is low operating helicopter,
light observation, he was circling over us and lost his tail rotor on the helicopter, and he started going down. Like when you lose your tail rotor, it just auto rotates down. He came down through the trees, and like he'd landed it there,
like a whirligig.
Yeah, we went and got him out of the pilot out of the helicopter, and as soon as we got him out, it caught on fire and rounds started cooking off and off.
So you were awarded some fairly significant medals: Silver Star, Bronze with a V,
Purple Heart.
Purple Heart. And so you say in this story, Quarter Cav, to your son, hey, take them. And if they don't mean anything to you, burn them. I don't want them to fall in the hands of collectors. Now, this takes us to a story you and I have discussed, and we both know a man named Tony Banks, who was a Marine Sergeant Major. If I remember correctly, 9 combat deployments as a tanker. So when Tony sees medals at a yard sale, he purchases them to keep them out of the hands of, as you say, collectors and wannabes. You don't want your medals to end up like that. Those medals ending up in strangers' hands or collectors' hands, it does seem to me very alienating. Walk me through your feelings on that.
We have a term for these people, stolen valor.
Yeah.
I can't think like someone that would want to steal valor to try to impress people. But for someone to take a combat medal and wear it that they didn't earn or didn't even deserve, I want to take that person and just slap the hell out of them.
What about just a collector? Somebody who wants to add it to a collection or buy and sell and speculate and make money on it? It doesn't sound much better.
I can't think like that. I mean, it's like I can see collecting Mickey Mouse glove,
Yeah.
but a combat medal that somebody has given their life or been wounded, I can't think like that. And I don't think like that.
Hmm.
I don't know if I answered your question.
You did, Jess, because that is what a warrior who deserved those awards would say. If you could imagine it, you might certainly not have been the warrior to go out and do the deeds that those medals commemorate. Last question. Your sense of Vietnam looking back on it. We've had a wide range of warriors sit in this chair, talk to me. They've been in every conflict from Vietnam up through a couple years ago, Afghanistan and Iraq. Do you have any feelings about the generations of warriors that came after Vietnam? The guys who had McDonald's back at their base camp, the guys who didn't fight in the jungle but fought in deserts. Is there a brotherhood of warriors? Do you look at the subsequent generations? Where are you with that as an honored and well experienced combat veteran from Vietnam?
In every conflict, everybody has their own sacrifices that they make. And I would not ever dare belittle somebody that was in Afghanistan, nor would I compare what I did with somebody with D-Day invasion.
Mm.
It's just a different generation, a different thing, different sacrifices that people had to make. But the bottom line is, this is not a game. You can get killed, and people do get killed.
The through line is when Uncle Sam called, they picked up the phone and answered. And whatever Uncle Sam asks, if you say yes, seems that there's an indelible brotherhood and sisterhood.
I mentored some high school kids and all, and when you're 19, 20, you think you're invincible and bulletproof. So when Uncle Sam calls, you answer the phone and you go. And then when I got to Vietnam, I was really certain that I wasn't going to make it back. I guess I was at peace with myself about that. And, like in the story here, I was a senior platoon leader 3 months after I was in country.
Hmm.
And that's a scary thought. I just came back from a reunion of my platoon. I've told those guys, I said, you guys were crazy, but you were even more crazy to follow me.
No.
In this story, the cab story here, one of my guys told me, he said, you were always volunteering us for these missions. And I told him, I said, I didn't volunteer you. What happened was the battalion commander really liked me. And so if he had to send some part of his unit to another unit, he would send somebody that he trusted. And he trusted me. Well, unfortunately, where he sent me, my men had to follow.
Wasn't just sending you.
No.
I want to end on a comical note. Sharky running around, firing his pistol at nothing because illumination round canisters are falling, and he's just firing into the night. I need you to describe that for me because that's right out of Catch-22.
Well, you have to know Dennis Sharkey. Dennis was afraid a lot, most of the time, but he never let his fear keep him from doing his job. He was my forward observer, my artillery man, and he did not want to be out in the jungle. He wanted to be with an artillery unit, but he had to drag along with us, and he was scared a lot. And that night, when everybody in the cav unit started shooting in all directions, I looked up, and there's Denny with his .45 pistol going bam, 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 and reload.
Reloads and keeps shooting at nothing. Of all the stories I've heard, and I've said, which one would be me? I finally heard the guy that I would be, him.
One of the things that's not brought out in here that's overlooked is the quarter cav awarded me a set of silver spurs. Now, if you're an armor officer and a cav officer, it's a very sacred ceremony to be awarded the silver spurs. Nowadays, guys have to go through this test to prove it. And to be an infantry officer awarded a set of silver spurs, I took that very serious. And it was a very, very touching thing for me.
What will happen to them? Will your son want them?
He better take care of them like he does all the rest of the medals. They're just as sacred.
Jess, it's always a pleasure to see you, my brother. Thank you for coming in.
My honor.
The Mighty Pen Project is a free writing program for military veterans and their families offered by the Virginia War Memorial Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit. If you'd like to learn more about the Mighty Pen or just send us your thoughts, email us at mppodcast@vawarmemorial.org or use the link in the podcast description. If you're a veteran or a family member of a serviceman or woman listening to this podcast anywhere in America and you want to learn how to best tell your own powerful stories, you can sign up for one of our Mighty Pen writing workshops on Zoom. If you want to read today's stories and many more, use the link to go to the Mighty Pen archive. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it. Music for this episode was provided by Jackson Albrecht. Lastly, if you'd like to support the Mighty Pen's efforts to record and preserve these stories of service, adventure, and sacrifice, follow the charitable donation link in the podcast description. I'm David L. Robbins, and I want to thank you for listening to the Mighty Pen Podcast. It's an honor.